how that affects the wines, and also about the personalities and the philosophies of the winemakers themselves, because in many respects they're kind of like a chef using ingredients to make a dish, and using the same ingredients you make all kinds of different dishes. So those are the kind of recurring themes that we're going to sort of touch on as we go through. So let's key it off with the Bouchard Ainé 2017 Bourgogne. That's the first glass wine we're going to be tasting. A regional Burgundy. Very quickly, just so you know about the winery, it's one of the oldest wine producers, merchant houses in Burgundy. Now, they've been making wine in Burgundy for 2,000 years, and seriously making wine in Burgundy, well, only fairly recently, since the 12th century. But the serious wine trade, exporting, trading, bottling, buying fruit, and international selling wines, what we call a négociant, really only dates from the end of the 18th century. And so the Bouchard family were actually cloth traders in Lyon, and they used to run carts with their cloth from Lyon up to Belgium to sell wines. And basically that put them one night's carriage ride in the sort of early in the late 1700s, put you in Beaune overnight. And that's how they met people, and they just started buying barrels of wine and putting them on their cart and selling them when they got to Brussels or Amsterdam or Paris or wherever else they were selling their cloth. So that's what a real, a négociant originally was that. And so this, in 1750, Joseph Bouchard decided that obviously the wine trade was more lucrative, interesting and sexy than selling cloth. And so he moved his family to Beaune and set up a winery. And the Bouchard family have been there ever since. Now, the third generation, Theodore, his son split off his father. So Ainé means eldest son. And so the third generation, Joseph Theodore, started a competition with his dad. And since that time, in the early 1800s, there have been two Bouchards in Beaune, basically as staple flagship wineries in the ancient city of Beaune. So very, very old winery. That the Boisset family acquired in 1992. Let me just tell you quickly, don't want to do a lot of screen sharing because I don't want it to be kind of like a talk and talk, but I just did want to point out a couple of things so we know what we're doing. There's France, all right? So the wines we're going to be tasting on the French side today are going to be coming from Burgundy. So here's Burgundy. You can see Burgundy is actually all of this area here, but the winemaking really only takes place here. I'll zoom it later, but also you have Chablis, we'll talk about later, which is a little satellite up in the top there. So the wines we're tasting today are for the Bourgogne, which is here, the wine you have in your glass, and the Chablis, which is a little satellite up in the middle. And if I come down, let's if you can see that quickly, the wines we're tasting, the first one we're tasting is a Bourgogne, and the wines, the grapes are being sourced from 3 different regions. Principally down here in the Mâconnais, also in the Côte-Chalonnaise around the town of the village of Ruane, and then in these regional vineyards just in the south of the Côte de Beaune. So interestingly, when we talk about terroir specific, obviously as a regional appellation in Burgundy means the grapes can come from lots of different villages, lots of different parts of Burgundy and be put together. In many respects, it's less terroir specific talk about where all the grapes are coming from a much more tightly defined area. And Terry will touch on California appellation, AVAs, and single vineyards, which pretty much mirrors the French system of appellation. So this is a Bourgogne, and a Bourgogne is a regional Burgundy wine. The whites are pretty much all Chardonnay. There's 1 or 2 exceptions, but if it's white and from Burgundy, 99% of the time it's Chardonnay. And if it's red from Burgundy, it's always Pinot Noir. There we are. So we're drinking a Bourgogne, which are coming from these different areas. The winemaker, there he is. There's my friend Laurent Méret, and it's kind of like the before and after photo. There we are. So that's Laurent 20 years ago when we bought Bouchard in 1992, and that's Laurent today. So he's been there all this time. Born in Dijon, and a very typical traditional Burgundy winemaker. So when we talk about traditional Burgundy winemakers, we'll talk a little bit about the winemaking, but here he's using very traditional Burgundy techniques, specifically in this wine. So we're talking for generic Burgundy, it's a stainless steel tank ferment. Grapes are regional varietals. They don't have the same power and complexity, so you don't want to over-egg the pudding by oak fermenting them. You need to keep the freshness and the delicate nature of the wine in by doing a stainless steel ferment first. That keeps the freshness in. And then we transfer it to oak barrels for tasting. I saw the text sheet you sent out, Janet, was curtailed for some reason. They only talked about the vinification and about the aging. So this is oak aged, but when you smell it, yeah, there's only just a little hint. So there's nothing overtly oaky and woody that you might relate to in a California wine. Just a subtle hint of something just a little bit toasty, and more about the texture when you taste it. You're getting a little bit of that fatness and richness, which is coming from the oak aging.
How long is it actually on the oak?
So it depends on the vintage. Typically somewhere between 9 months and a year. So 2017 was a classic Burgundy vintage, and we're talking about classic Burgundy vintage. Generally, that means cooler, shorter summers and growing seasons. So wines with less maturity, less ripeness, higher acidity, and more freshness. So this one was in the barrel for about 9 months, and very little new oak at all. There's maybe 5 or 10% barrels. It's mostly second and third year barrels. So we're looking to let the wine breathe and soften, rather than flavour it by putting making it overtly making it overtly oaky.
And is it French oak?
Of course, bien sûr, it's French. Good question. Maybe we can, when we completed the whole tasting, we can talk more specifically about oak, because Terry will have some things to say about the oak on the Raymond wine. Yes, all our barrels come from the centre of France for Bouchard. The forests of Tronçon and Allier and Nevers, which are the central regions of France, where it has massive forests that they use for that. And then finally, just to touch on the terroir, there we are. There he is. This is what the vineyards. I'll put a photo in the vineyards look like in regional Burgundy. This is the Mâconnais. You see, the Mâconnais is very much rolling hills. Until you get to anyone who's on the last tasting, we got to some specific Mâconnais wines with some very specific terroir and rock, but basically most of the Mâconnais, you saw it on that map, which is here, all this regional, which is these blue vineyards here, is pretty much the floodplain of the Saône River that flows down to Lyon, which is down here. And so really you're talking about Valley forefruit, and you can see there's a lot of polyculture here. A lot of the, next to the vineyards, there's wheat and corn and sunflower growing at the same time, so it's not an area that's 100% dedicated to wines. And so they're areas of wines where the soil is rich, retains a lot of moisture, and therefore are quite vigorous, give a lot of juice, not necessarily with the same intensity and complexity that you get from a higher level Burgundy. So enjoy and taste. Let me get out of that, because I'm putting myself to sleep with it. There we are. and your faces, the maps.
That was really informative, though. Thank you so much. I love hearing the story behind the wine and the family who makes it.
Thank you. So first thing is when you smell a typical young Burgundy is that the fruit flavors are very different from the wine you're going to be tasting later, because of these cooler climates and higher acid levels. The fruit doesn't get as ripe, so it's much more that sort of citrus tones, light yellow, sort of white peach and citrus on the nose. There's just a hint of something just with a little bit of oak on there. And it's a little soft and juicy. And then that typical telltale bright tart citrus fruit that you get from Burgundy. It's got a very sort of almost pink grapefruit finish on the end there. There we go. So anyway, my beautiful wife is going to come sit next to me. Oh, very good.
Wow, look at that, Neil.
There we go. So,
hi, Kathy.
There we go. All right, Terry, I'll hand it over to you, and we're going to start off. We've got a little bit of nibbles. I just want to present. This is a typical Burgundy cheese puff. These are called gougères, and they're just hot and warm out of the oven. So it's a choux pastry with Gruyere cheese in, a typical Burgundy. When you go to wine tastings in Burgundy, you typically do this. So, Cathy,
Goodness.
enough to cook these for us. So,
Gotta make it there one day.
bon appetit, Terry. Over to you and to our Raymond Reserve.
So before I go any further, Cathy and Neil have been kind enough to invite me to stay over when I go down to DC. It's so much better than any five-star hotel. Forget about the points. I get to stay at the house. I'm downstairs in the room. They kick their son out. I get to stay there for.
It looks like the food's probably better.
I know. I would go just for those puff pastries.
Absolutely.
These are delicious and they're warm. Oh my God, they're so good. Oh, great. Anyway.
So Neil knows this. My parents are in the restaurant business in New York City, and I was down there a couple of weeks ago, and I happened to notice where one of them, I'm assuming it was a waitress, had a little sticker on the computer that said, my mother's name is Anne, and my father's name is Terry as well. And on the computer it said, smile at Terry, listen to Anne. Okay, and so that's a little bit like Neil. So you can smile at Terry, but listen to Neil. Okay. Neil's got a wealth of information. I love to listen to him as well. And so for me, you know, I'm not big on these PowerPoint presentations either, but I am going to show a few slides because it is hard to talk about the Raymond Winery without talking about Boisset Collection, the company, and Jean-Charles Boisset, our owner. Okay, and so I see somebody nodding their head. It sounds like somebody might know who Jean-Charles is, but
we were lucky enough to go to a tasting that he hosted in DC last December. It was amazing.
With Full Up at the Georgetown Club.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah. How good was that?
Oh my God, it was amazing.
Incredible.
He's such a personality.
Yeah.
Oh my God, he is incredible.
Yeah.
He really is. So you got a good dose of Jean-Charles and what he's all about. And you know, sometimes when they say you're in the wine business, who do you work for? And I say Boisset Collection, people look at you cross-eyed because the name, for the most part, doesn't mean anything to people. Because there's no wine brands kind of associated with it. But
right.
Jean-Charles's family, I mean, he's born and buttered in Burgundy, and he was born in 1969, but it's his mom and dad that started the business basically selling wine out of the back of their car. Okay, that's just how they sold wine. They were negociants. They got liquid, they bottled it, they brought it to friends bought it. And that's how they started to sell wine. And, you know, I'm going to say maybe 20 years later, to date, they own 20% of all grapes grown in Burgundy.
Wow.
That's huge.
It's huge. And so, I mean, he's a real power player that way, you know, when it comes to Burgundy. And so his thing is he's all about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And so it made sense for him when he decided to kind of, you know, no oldest son wants to follow in the path of their dad. They have to do their own thing. And so he went west out to the US. And the first property he bought was a winery called Deloach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Deloach Winery right in Santa Rosa. Wonderful, one of the most serene places on earth if you ever get a chance to go out there. But and the reason he bought Deloach is because it's really a kind of it's a miniature Burgundy, just the topography, the climate, everything about it. And it specializes in Pinot and Chardonnay. And he did that in 2003. And so 6 years later, he purchased Raymond Winery. And so I have a little slide that takes you through kind of the history. Let me just see here now, share screen. This looks familiar. Okay. All right. Okay, good. At least I get to be able to see people
Oh, wow.
while I'm, so has anybody been to Raymond?
I wish. Is
No.
anyone else?
No, nobody has. Oh, well, I have to tell you this. If you get out to Napa, if you're lucky enough to get out to Napa, you have to take the time. And you can contact Neil or I. We can set you up on a VIP tour. It's very easy for us to do.
Oh, well, we'll have to let you know. We have good friends in Napa and San Francisco. And
Well,
we were supposed to go earlier this year, but
I know.
obviously with everything going on, but hopefully we'll go next year.
right.
We got to make it back.
You know,
Well-
do you know if this vineyard and the Deloach vineyard are okay with all the fires?
Yes, everybody's okay. It's been contained now, and everybody's okay. But this is the second time for Deloach, and for the same reason they managed to escape which was basically had the wind blown east, it wouldn't be here today.
Oh, yeah.
Just on the day the winds blew west, and so they were fine. You know, at somebody else's
And will
expense.
the Pinots be usable?
I'm sorry.
Will the Pinots be usable, or do they have the smoke damage?
Yeah, they're still working. They're still working through that.
Yeah, we follow another vineyard that's south of there, and all of their Pinot grapes are not any good. They're in the Menlo Park area, at the south of San Francisco. The Chardonnay they think will be fine because
Okay.
I mean the skin isn't as important in the making of Chardonnay. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I heard a lot of California fruit may be used to make rosés to avoid that skin contact issues. Actually, it's a rumor I heard fairly recently in this year. So
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Most of the folks at Napa think they're writing off this entire vintage. You know, unfortunately, you know, it's just been a bit of a hell of a year.
well, Bordeaux's got a shed load of Cabernet that they'll be happy to ship in California.
I bet that they do. So let's see here. So how do I get past this now?
Just click on your presentation, Terry. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we all know what you know. So you know, this is just a little bit of a little map of Napa here. I mean, we've all kind of seen what it's all about, but you've got basically the way this works is, you know, you've got basically the Pacific Ocean here. You've got the hot climate right here in Napa, and it creates a little bit of a vacuum effect that brings the cold air right from the Pacific right up into the Napa region and creates that little that fog line that sits, you know, in the early mornings, sits on the vineyards and sits on the grapes that helps to preserve those grapes, right? And that's where we get the, you know, the wonderful acidity and balance, you know, on those grapes. So the Raymond Napa Valley Chard is down here. Do you see Los Carneros?
Mm-hmm.
Down here, the southernmost tip. Actually, Los Carneros straddles both Napa and Sonoma. Okay, so obviously we're on the Napa side, right in and about here in Jameson Canyon. Okay, so that's where we grow. That's where we grow the grapes that we use in this 2018 Raymond Napa Chardonnay. And you get the winds that kick up from the San Pablo Bay here. And creates that little fog that settles right in and over Jameson Canyon. All right. So I was saying to Janet prior that it just happened to be that it's an incestuous business out in Napa as well. You've got the Berengers, you got Charles Krug, all these guys are kind of same, kind of same cast of characters, but. The Raymond family goes back to Jacob Berenger. So Roy Raymond in 1933, he moved to Napa, and he wound up. So he worked for Berenger. In 1956, he became the head winemaker for Berenger, and then he married Martha Jane Berenger. Okay, then they had two sons, Walter Raymond and Ray Jr. Okay, so Roy Raymond bought Raymond Vineyards in 1970. Okay, so at that time the original plot was basically 90 acres. right in Napa, and the vineyards were basically in Rutherford and in St. Helena. And so 1974 was the very first vintage of Raymond. Actually, tonight I pulled up an old bottle. I haven't seen it in years, but it's a 97 Raymond that I'm going to bring over to a friend's house tonight, and we're going to open this up because of tonight's conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that'll be so fun.
It's got all the dust and everything on it to make it nice and authentic.
Yeah.
Be sure to send tasting notes.
Oh yes, I can't show you the what is it, Neil? The Gruyere.
The Gruyere.
Bouchard.
The Gruyere.
Bouchard, sorry, Bouchard, yeah.
But I have this. And so anyway.
Did your wife make that, Terry?
Yeah, about 25 years ago. Yes, and so in 2000 and so Jean-Charles bought the property in 2009, and that's when in 2010 I think the best part of the story is Stephanie Putnam, our winemaker. Okay, Jean-Charles hired her in 2010. Okay, and so one of the principles that cuts across all of the Boisset properties is the real commitment to sustainability. And I thought it was interesting. I did not know this until tonight, that Raymond Vineyards is the largest biodynamic estate in Napa, and it's the only Demeter certified winery in Napa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was not aware that it was the only one. And so we have 50,000 square feet of solar panels. We actually, we have it's like 135% output. So we wound up selling, I think 25 or 35% back to the state of California. So it is very green. And Jean-Charles, we're always like, we should be marketing this more, but for him, it's just a way of life. And he doesn't see it as, he doesn't see it as anything special or anything marketable. For him, it's just, we're preserving the land for the next generation. So this is what we own in Napa, okay? So we have in total, we have 380 acres. We have 106 acres in Rutherford between the Tyson Vineyard and the Raymond Estate Vineyard. So it's right in Rutherford. And it's planted to Cab, Petit Syrah, and Malbec. Interesting, we don't do any Malbec from Raymond. But in St. Helena, we have 64 acres. 10 acres of the Stice Vineyard, and then 54 acres of the Bartolucci Vineyard. That's our most recent. And where we make the Jameson Canyon Napa Chard, we have it's 210 acres, and 130 acres of it planted to Chard and Sauvignon Blanc. So I just thought I'd show this. Jean-Charles is big on labels. He's big on labels, okay?
I think like he has an Irish style.
We are the first winery to adhere a velvet label to a bottle. Okay, it's worth pointing out. And so we actually tried to put a yellow velvet label on the Chard, but if you put it on ice, it falls off, much to our chagrin. But we tried it anyway. But we have, we have the Cab, we have the red wine, we have the Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and the Napa Chardonnay. But we're here tonight to talk about the Chard, and up to the, I think Stephanie wouldn't want me to talk about the wine without talking about her team. Stephanie up in the left-hand corner is our director of winemaking. We also have, we use Philippe Melka. Janet, you might be familiar with Philippe. He's fairly high profile out in Napa. He's a winemaking consultant that we use. He's a, he consults on 2 of the wines. I think it's the District and the Generations. But his specialty, I think, is oak aging, and that's kind of why we use him. And so that's the rest of her team there, and that's her and Jean-Charles many moons ago. The upper left-hand corner. Stephanie, okay, so this is Stephanie, okay? She's our director of winemaking. Wonderful. I've done many wine dinners with Stephanie. I've worked many days in trade with Stephanie. She's a joy to work with. I mean, how adorable is she? Okay, now, A couple of things about Stephanie. First of all, she interviewed to become an FBI agent. Made it to the very last round, but she got cut because she's only 4'11", and you have to be 5 feet to work for the FBI.
What?
So John Charles is very happy that that rule was in effect. She's an avid scuba diver. She has scuba dived all over the world. That is her favorite kind of getaway. When she talks about going up to the Jameson Canyon to get grapes, she says it's so easy for her to find out when the grapes are ripe enough to be picked because she has Winston. Okay? She calls Winston's the world famous four-legged grape sampler. Okay, dogs are not supposed to eat grapes, but when she brings the dog up, this is the only dog she knows, she's been doing this for years, that if the dog eats the grapes are ripe enough to be picked. And that is that's how she determines whether the grapes are ripe enough to be picked.
That is wild.
No.
Yes. And I put this picture of her down here because she always talks about when she goes up to the Jameson Canyon from the fog, it's so moist that her hair gets poofy. So I put that in there.
I can relate.
Yeah. Same.
You can relate? Yes. Yeah.
Curly hair.
And so anyway, this is what our tasting room is all about. I wasn't even going to get into this, but these are things that you need to see when you go to the winery. But anyway.
The Baccarat Crystal Chandelier. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The Theater of Nature, the Red Room, there's a lot of wonderful things to see. But let's talk about the wine. Okay? I mean, if anybody has any thoughts about what they're getting, what they're tasting, this is the 2018 vintage, which according to our tech notes, was a picture perfect vintage. Okay? And it was perfect because it started out as a perfect February, followed by a very mild spring. Okay? And it just yielded perfectly uniform grape clusters, and the temperatures were just remain moderate to cool throughout the season, with 2018 being, I'm just reading from the tech notes here, being considered one of the coolest vintages of the past decade. Okay, so everything was perfect about the vintage. Okay,
It's so different than the first one that we
isn't
had.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of the body.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely get a little bit hot. You're coming in at about 14.5% alcohol. You probably picked up on that.
So the first one, just for your information, that you tasted was about 12.8, 13 degrees alcohol. So there's a good degree to a degree and a half difference in alcohol, which is fairly typical for comparing Burgundy to California wines.
The thing that makes this wine different than most Chardonnays that I've tasted or that we sell is that there is no malolactic fermentation on this wine. And Neil can talk more about the specifics of what that's all about. But this wine is no malolactic fermentation, and it's on its lees, so it gets stirred. The yeast cells, so the wine gets stirred, periodically. And that's what gives it the kind of creaminess. So when a lot of people taste this wine, they're very surprised that there's actually no mallow in this wine. And that's one big difference between this wine and the wines that we're going to taste from France.
So how is this made, Terry? Is this directly fermented in the barrel, or is it tank fermented and then oak aged?
No, it's directly fermented in the barrel. In the barrel. This is 19% new French oak, 10 months in barrel.
So this is why I find this particular California Chardonnay more elegant. It really expresses the fruit rather than shaping, which often happens.
Yeah.
It's really, I haven't tasted a good California Chardonnay in a long time.
I know.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank
And
you.
the temperature. So for some of you who I've always stressed, open it at the time and then watch the evolution of the wine. So we'll have comments at the end so that I don't interrupt your presentation, but this is
Yes.
exciting.
So does anybody else have any comments about the difference in flavors of the two wines, the difference in profile, or comments or questions about those two? Because they have, I think, a very good example of a regional Burgundy against a very good example of a regional California wine in a more elegant style. So anybody want to pitch in?
They're both very nice, and they're very different, but I think the French is very elegant. I think there's more richer flavor with the Raymond. I don't know if I'm getting a little more tannins. I don't know if there's more skin contact and you get a little bit more tannin, or it could just be the temperature. But they're both really nice, and I agree with Janet. It's not like, you know, those mass market buttery,
Really oaky, yeah.
right? It's a really elegant.
It is.
And I've had the fortunate opportunity to have tasted Montrachet. And so you're talking about this intensity and mouthfeel that emulates what that is. And it's striking. Very beautiful.
Well,
Any other comments?
Can I ask a
Pardon?
quick question?
Sure.
I know this is probably a novice question, but the acid that you mentioned, Terry, what causes that?
Okay, so when we talk about malolactic fermentation, when you make wine, there are two fermentations. So there's the alcoholic fermentation, which is the classic fermentation where the yeasts transform the sugars into alcohol, right?
Yeah, right.
There's a second fermentation, which is a bacterial fermentation that takes place after that is finished, and that can take place immediately after alcoholic fermentation. It can take place sometimes over the next year or even longer, where enzymes in the wine transform malic acid into lactic acid. So the natural acid when you make the wine is malic acid, and malic acid has this very sort of green apple tasting profile. So if you taste the acidity of these two wines, you'll see they both have high acidity, which is great because it's very food friendly and very fresh. But Kathy was sitting next to me. She says, "Oh, I find that really, really high in acid." Actually, if you measure the total acidity, they're not that different. It's just the profile is different because this malic acid tends to be so much more tart than lactic acid. Lactic comes from milk, then the creaminess of Chardonnays often comes from when you do malolactic fermentation. You get the lactic acid, which is a little more creamy. So that's one of the big differences between cool climate Chardonnay, where the malolactic fermentation is pretty much systematic and 100% all the time in Burgundy. Although with global warming, we're starting to see sometimes people pulling the malolactic fermentation back, because you can stop malolactic fermentation. You can choose, there are ways of stopping it. But typically in California, they don't do malolactic fermentation, and not all the time. When they do, that's when you get these big, blousy, creamy, heavy Chardonnays, because they don't keep the freshness in. Okay. In Burgundy in a general year, let's say what used to be normal, these cooler, shorter summers meant that the struggle is always against under maturity. So you get high acid levels and fruit flavors that are on those primary citrus fruits. In California, generally, with the warmer temperatures and more sunshine hours, you're getting bigger, juicier Chardonnays. And so the challenge is to keep that freshness in. And so that's why you have these two different winemaking philosophies.
Oh, interesting.
Malolactic fermentation, you keep that initial tartar acidity in the wine rather than transferring into malolactic acid, because the levels of malolactic in the California ones are going to be very low, and then so you get these big, blousy Chardonnays.
Wow, super interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So the acidity in these wines are hitting different parts of my mouth. They do seem to be very different acid profiles. And in fact, this wine, the Raymond wine, has a very soft feel in my mouth, even though and then I taste the acid. Whereas in the first wine, my mouth knew it was acidic before I even tasted it, because it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great comment, Beth, and that brings us to another point, which is the what you might call the sort of fruit profile and acid put together. So there's a couple of things that come into that. So firstly, of course, the more sunshine hours and more temperature you have, the riper the fruit is. So this ripe and richness in this California wine is becoming because it's a lot riper fruit. You know, it's the difference between a Granny Smith apple and a Golden Delicious apple, or let's say fresh citrus or candied citrus, and a candied lemon against very fresh lemon juice. So yes, the profile, part of that sort of riper, warmer mouthfeel, that juiciness you're getting in California, is because basically it's warmer and hotter in California than it is in Burgundy. The consequence of that, of course, is that you get higher sugar levels and therefore higher alcohol. One of the byproducts of alcoholic fermentation is glycerin. You know, when you see the legs on your glass. And so that mouthfeel is also about the glycerol that's in the wine. So that richness, that smoothness, that creaminess that you feel on your mouth, the difference between drinking half and half and full cream is because of the extra glycerin that you're getting with the extra alcoholic fermentation. So yes, you're absolutely right. When you taste this California wine, it's much more upfront fruit, much more juicier, riper, peachier fruit tones, followed by this malic acid, you know, sort of green apple tart finish. Whereas off the bat in Burgundy Chablis, we're going to taste the Chablis in a minute. You'll see the first thing is zing. It's zippy and it's lean and mean, right? And so no right or wrong. It's how do you like your eggs? But that really does explain the difference in the flavor profiles between those two wines.
I have a question. So tell me about Stephanie and her training, and was she influenced by certain wines? Is there a benchmark in her head that she aims for? Because this is a very elegant wine.
Isn't it? So before she came to us, she's been with us now for 10 years. She was at Farniente for 8 years, where she changed the house style at Farniente herself. And then she worked at Hess.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you can kind of see that, you know, you can see that in some of the Chardonnays. I think I know, you know, what she's a big fan of, obviously Chardonnays, but on the Cabernet side, she's a very big fan of extended maceration. I know she likes to, you know, if it's an average of 18 to 20 days on the skins, she likes to keep it 35 to 45, up to 60 days, depending on where which vineyard the grapes are coming from.
So in terms of specific wines that she has in her head, what would that be on the red side and the white side? I've had conversations with winemakers, and there's always something that is their benchmark in their head and palate. Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know that I could say which wine it is. I mean, for her, it's, you know, it's just from one vintage to the next, or from one year to the next. I don't think I hear about other brands from her. Obviously for us, generations would be the, you know, I mean, Stephanie likes to say that it's easy to make great wine with great grapes, but how do you make great wine with good grapes?
Yeah.
So 2017 was not a great vintage. We had a couple of heat spikes, and especially one around Labor Day, 2017. But she worked around that on the 17 Chardonnay, and I think we got 91 points from Spectator and 91 from Wine Enthusiast for the 2017 vintage. And so she's able to make it work even when, you know, when the vintage isn't optimal. I think that's what she aspires to be, is she almost prefers to have a vintage that's not the perfect vintage, so that she can kind of play with the wines in certain ways. In 2014, 25% of this wine was in stainless steel. Yeah, and that was the only year. And again, 90 points from Wine Enthusiast as well. So I don't know. I think it's the off vintage years that she really seems to like more than anything else, because she's challenged by it.
It's like in terms of you're buying or collecting, you buy the great producers in the bad year because you know the wine's going to be good, and so the points have not spiked the price.
That's right. That's right.
Terry, any questions? using French barrels, right?
Always, always. And no more than 20% new French oak on the Chardonnay.
Right.
So it goes up to
Yeah.
70% on the generations.
A little more toast on the barrel than probably you would find in some of our Burgundies, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I know they use Seguin Moreau, they Demptos. I forget which other French barrels that we use. But yeah, a little bit more toast, Neil.
Also fair, probably, maybe. Yeah.
I've done wine dinners with her, and she always asks the question, who here likes Chardonnay? And you have people, yep. Who here does not like Chardonnay? And you get half, the other half, they go, me. And she goes, try this Chardonnay. I'm telling you, all of those people go, wow, I like this Chardonnay because it is straight down the middle. It's not overly oaky. It's not overly buttery. It's just, for me, it's right down the middle, and it's a great food wine.
So Neil, were you asking about the toastiness? Because we've been actually having an argument here as we're tasting it. We read the things on the bottle about honeysuckle and all that. And I keep, especially when we first opened it, there was like a lot of licorice and a little bit of smokiness. And it's rounded since it's been open. So there's more of the fruit. But I still taste, and you know, this spicy, it's like a little bit of spice kind of in it. And so is that what you were talking about when you said it must be toasted more?
Yeah, so yeah, my impression as well, I'd have to speak to Stephanie, you know, and what I know about California wines, I freely admit I could write on a postage stamp. So I know, you know, a little bit generally about winemaking and a fair bit about Burgundy, but yes. So, I mean, you know that when they make a barrel, you can order a barrel, but you can order which forest it comes from, which makes a difference in the wine. American oak in general comes from oak trees that are grown once again in warmer climates, so they're kind of like thicker grain and therefore have more sap in them, you know. Whereas in France, it's cooler forests, you know, cooler European climate, so the grain is a lot tighter, the wood is a lot harder. And what barrel makers do is then they toast the inside of the barrels before you put wine in them. And depending on how you cook your barrel, it'll give you a different flavor profile to your wine. So barrels do two things, and especially you flavor your wines in a kind of way by putting them in oak, and then you soften them. And new oak gives more to the wine than it takes away, and old oak takes more out of the wine than it gives to it, because, you know, it's like a tea bag. Whenever you used a barrel 2 times, by the 3rd time you use it, usually 3 times, there's not a lot of flavoring left in the wood, right? So more flavorsome, if you like, you might say from American oak, less flavorsome from less flavor input from French wine. But as you say, if you toast it, if you put a very high flame inside your barrel and toast it for not very long time, you'll get like a skin of a creme brulee or of a rice pudding, right? If you heat it on a gentle flame for a long time, you'll get less oakiness, less toastiness going in, but the effect of that oak will go on a much long time. So when they talk about oak barrels, the type of oak barrels, they talk about the heat of the flame and how long they've done it. So a medium heat, high heat, long or short, or medium toast, and that will affect. So my impression, and I may be wrong, my impression tasting was like yours, Beth, when I tasted it. So when it was open, I immediately got that sort of, you know, that sort of popcorny, you know, caramelized flavors, which to me kind of indicated there was a little of a higher heat on the barrel. And I may be wrong on that, but it was kind of my impression. Now, of course, there's very little oak at all on the, you know, new oak at all on the first wine, so you're not getting anything. It's very light toast, and it's only 10% new barrels, so you're not getting really anything overtly oaky. You're just getting those little soft hints of it at the back.
Let's move on a little bit. I gave this actually extra time, knowing that this was going to be a juicy conversation. So we've got till 7:15. So please continue. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's charge our glasses with a little bit of Chablis, huh?
I beat you to
We're
it.
not sure what. Good for you. Well, pour yourself a second glass then. You know what you should probably do is put a Chablis in and rinse it and either drink it quickly or tip it and then pour yourself a second glass, because there's no oak at all on this. Just quickly show you a little bit about, there we are, that was the end of Burgundy. Here's the lovely Lucie Dupuis at Chablis. Hang on, if I can get, I've got you guys all blocking my view. So Lucie has been the winemaker at J. Moreau Feast since 2007. So we like to joke about that, like she started winemaking when she was 10 years old or something, because she looks eternally youthful. That's what the Chablis wines will do to you. But a terrific winemaker. She did her her master's degree in enology, and her thesis was actually on the soils of Chablis. So she's a geologist originally. Her first degree before doing enology was geology, and so she mapped all of the soils of Chablis. And I don't think anybody understands the terroir better than Lucie. Now, talk about terroir here, because we're going to talk specifically that Chablis is a much more tightly defined growing area than either Bourgogne Blanc or Napa Valley Chardonnay. And so the influence of the individual soil types are more important here. In Burgundy on the valley floors, it's all clay and limestone, but a lot of rich, deep clay. And therefore, you're not getting the sort of rockiness and stoniness that influences the quality of the wine as much. And basically in Napa Valley Chardonnays as well, it's mostly loams, which are kind of, I don't want to say terroir neutral, but the influence of the actual soil types on a Napa Valley Chardonnay are not the same as they would be on an Anderson Valley AVA, for example, and the same is true of Burgundy. And this idea that terroir is very important is probably more important in Chablis than anywhere else in Burgundy. I think the influence of actually what the soil types are. And as I say, I don't think anybody understands that terroir better than Lucie. So there she is, and she's been with us, as I say, since 2007. You should look up her just in recent vintages since 16, 17. We just got the reviews on our 18s, Premier Cruise, Grand Cruise. The reviews of her wines are off the charts from the Wine Spec Wine Enthusiast decanter. She's just such a talented winemaker, and does a great job for us. So that's Lucie. Let me talk about Chablis itself. So we saw Chablis that was, let's go back up, there we are. We saw Chablis was that little satellite right up here. You can see it's actually closer to Champagne and the Loire Valley than it is to the rest of Burgundy. I want you to think about that when you taste the wine, because in many respects, the acid profile and the profile of this, I think, of a Bourgogne is closer to a Sauvignon Blanc than it is to Burgundy from other parts of Burgundy, from Chardonnay. And it's almost, if you take the bubbles out, it's more like a Blanc de Blanc Champagne Chablis than it is like the white wines from Burgundy. It's just an anecdote, actually, that in the 14th century, the Dukes of Burgundy kicked the butts of the kings of the Dukes of Champagne and conquered this part of France, which got attached to Burgundy when really it shouldn't have been there at all. That's just for the history. So let's talk a little bit more about the soil type specifically and the appellation. So there's the town of Chablis. There are 20 different communes here. A commune is a little village that can produce the appellation of Chablis, and of which Chablis is at the heart. And the only thing that's grown here really in here is Chardonnay. There's a few reds that are grown around here, very light styles of Pinots, but pretty much if you're talking Chardonnay, Chablis, you're talking 100% Chardonnay. Now, when we talk about the soil types and the vineyards, you can see here compared to the rolling valleys and hills of the Côte Chalonnaise that we saw here, it's pretty much all dedicated to vine growing here. You can even just see from this photograph how much whiter the soils are here, how much lighter the soil types are than they are in the south of Burgundy. Principally in Burgundy, we're talking about two different soil types, one of which is Portlandian limestone. So, you talk about Portland and Oregon, but having sometimes similar wines to Burgundy. There's a reason for that. You know, that's the same bedrock, this very hard limestone that you find as the bedrock in Chablis. And then you get vineyards that have this, what we call Kimmeridgian limestone, which date back to the Jurassic period. So somewhere between 240 million and 170 million years ago. This was basically a warm, shallow sea, inhabited by oysters, you can see down here. Over those, millions of years, basically the oysters produced and reproduced and got crushed into the high calcium soils and produces what they call Kimmeridgian limestone soils. That's not unique to Chablis. You find it in the south of England. You find it a little bit in the Loire Valley as well, but it's most prevalent and most influential in the winemaking in Chablis itself. In Burgundy, the wine, the terroir is, they're all expressions of what we call argilo-calcaire, which are different expressions of clay and limestone. And generally, those limestones can be like potter's clay. They can be fossilized red clay, hard, what we call marls. They can be sort of thick, iron-rich clay red soils. And when we think about clay, we think about them being red and thick. But it really depends on the proportion of calcium or calcareous soil that you have in the mix. And in Burgundy, in general, the higher proportion you find of calcareous soil, the more conducive it is to growing Chardonnay. So here in Chablis, you have both this hard limestone and this Kimmeridgian soil, which are really, really conducive to producing these very clean, mineral-driven wines. The second thing you should note about Chablis from the map is how much further north it is than the rest of Burgundy. The only thing that's really making still wines north of Burgundy is Alsace and Lorraine. And if you tasted any Alsace wines, they are also very, really high acid and very, very zingy. So what characterizes Chablis is you have this northern climate, which is much cooler than the rest of Burgundy. You have these hard limestone soils, which are pretty much, and Kimmeridgian soils, which are unique to the area. And then you have a winemaking tradition, which is basically no use of oak at all in regional Chablis. Sometimes, we put like 15 or 20% of old oak with no toast on some of the Premier Crus, and Grand Crus to soften the wine, as we were talking earlier. But generally, village Chablis is always 100% stainless steel fermented and stainless steel aged. So when you're tasting this, again, a very, very different animal to the two Chardonnays that we just tasted. You might not think the same grape, right, when you taste it. So first of all, for me, whereas the Bourgogne and the Napa, the predominant aromas initially are fruit, either that sort of citrus floral fruit from Burgundy or that peachy fruit. Here for me, the thing right off the bat is that suddenly that rain on a dusty pavement. It's the minerality and that sort of smoky earthiness that comes out initially on the wine rather than the fruit. And then you can get those sort of those subtle floral notes. It's more floral than fruit, but it's not sort of yellow, rosy rose petal. It's sort of light, light white blossom, something like that you would smell, like a little bit of acacia or something like that. And then, Beth, even more than the first one, it's bing. It's like a laser beam of sharp acidity that runs straight through the palate. There's no creaminess, there's no richness. It's lean, it's mean, and it finishes on this sort of salty, savory note that is absolutely delicious. So it's a unique expression of Chardonnay, completely different to anything we've just tasted. But I think you can talk about Chablis being a Chardonnay, but I think you really have to consider Chablis as a Chablis made a grape, rather than almost putting it in the big picture of what you might think as Chardonnays in general. Such great length too, right? Goes on, tango, to see. Whereas those first two, we're sitting here nibbling, and whereas those first two, probably the Chardonnay from Napa Valley more than the rest, you might sit and drink a glass. I always say it pairs well with Games of Thrones, Not saying it's not a great food wine, it is, but because it has that soft, plush, juicy, ripe fruit, it's the kind of thing you pour a glass of and enjoy just on its own. Chablis needs something. It needs Gruyere, it needs a slice of ham, it needs a little bit of cheese. It's perfect, of course, with oysters and anything like that. But it's not a drink of choice aperitif type wine. It's definitely a food wine.
I would like to also add that I met Lucy when you did your portfolio tasting at the Georgetown Club. She was truly impressive. People kind of like passed it because it was Chablis, because you had other things that were really lush and lovely there. And I'd like to say that for Chablis, this is an amazing wines when you get into the vineyard designated levels, and that they are great value for money in terms of reaching that definitive level of flavor and designation of terroir and place. That she comes from this area, I had not known, because I was reading the information that she is from Chablis, and she's considered a viniculturist because, as you said earlier, she really was a geologist first. And so we have that benefit of living there, understanding, and what has come before her historically and what she's creating now. So this is a great treat because this is only the entry level.
Right.
And then we can explore the other levels if we so choose.
Well, our friends who regularly go into Pearson's, they have a really great selection of her wines, actually. They have 3 or 4 of her Premier Crus and some Grand Cru on the shelf. And so this is a kind of first step in. So if you want to treat yourself really and dig a little deeper, I really would encourage you to taste some of the Premier Crus.
And Sylvie's really lovely. She's very high response. I sent people there already. And they had an incredible time. And she's very generous. So thank you. And thank you for bringing this forward. So we're at 7:01 right now. So do we want to open this up for further conversation and questions, please? Molly and Helen, you have a lot of background. You've been holding out.
No, I love all the female winemakers.
I
It's so
know.
inspiring. It's amazing to see.
I agree.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought was really interesting when we were lucky enough to go to the tasting back in December was, Jean-Charles said he was so passionate about making sure all of the wine really was as close to like farm to bottle as possible. And he said now, you see so many additives in wines, and while you don't have to report any of the ingredients on the labels, I think it does come through in the wine in that collection, because all of them just seem a little bit more like, I hate when you taste a wine and you can tell, oh, there's it tastes like syrupy or
It's manufactured.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I always, whenever we go to a store where we're not at Pearson's, or we always look for Bouchard wines because we know that they're grown with a lot of care.
Well, what I like is what you said earlier was that they had the Demeter, certification, and that he thinks it's nothing. What is really important is it is nothing in France because everyone's working toward that. Mm-hmm. In America, I think that is just the overlay now that we are behind and just learning and understanding, so to let the terroir speak. And so what is very important is the understanding of what is going on and the long-term winemaker there, instead of the merry-go-round that often happens in a lot of California wineries that I know about. So it goes with fashion and it goes with a change of mode unless someone owns it, if the bank doesn't own it. And so we're very grateful that Boisset has a long-term vision and the possibility to do this and to bring that concept to America. Here it is again. We're learning and we're benefiting from this. So, I'm thrilled with this tasting, because when we talked about this tasting, I said, well, what's the story here? What are you talking about? And I was trying to understand what we were going to do, because I'm sort of really clear about where we want to go with things. And Neil was really lovely in explaining this. And so I learned a little bit more about Boisset's portfolio. So I'm very grateful for this. But
Yeah.
go on, please.
Back. Yeah.
can we talk a little bit more about the process of the wine opening up? I mean, this is one of the things that I've learned from Janet, because usually you go to wine tastings and the bottles are already open, right? And they're already, you know, so you don't know where it is in terms of the bottle. But all of these wines, you know, I actually have gone back to the 2017, and it is, I mean, look, I'm naive on this, but you know, to me, it somehow softens the wine. And what's going on? Is it literally off gassing that a lot of?
It's all about oxidation, Beth. And you know, as oxygen gets into the wine, it starts to break things down, and that does a number of things. It releases aroma. It softens acidity. You know, especially white wines. You know, if you do take the trouble to drink it over, you know, half an hour, that's tough. Sometimes getting past 15 minutes is difficult. But time to air in the glass. That's what it will do. There's another thing, of course, is what we call, but any food stuff, any liquid will have what we call volatile aromas and heavy aromas. Without getting too deep, you know, anything that's a volatile aroma is where the molecular mass is lighter than air. So you pour anything in, you know, any food stuff. When it's initial, it's very primary, right? But at some point in time, those aromas go up to aroma heaven or wherever they go, and it's the heavier aromas that stay in the glass. That's often why, for example, when you have a big Chardonnay, and you know, some of them I had from California. The first sip is like, oh wow, yeah, that's pretty good. When you leave them, and when all that freshness goes off, you're left with something very heavy and, you know, very heavy and dense and not very pleasant in the glass at the end. So there's part of that as well, as the oxygen gets in, that releases those aromas and they go away, and you're left with the heavier aromas that are left in the glass. Generally, you know, when you're doing wine tasting, those primary aromas, and I think, you know, particularly about Pinot Noir, the primary aromas are all those sort of bright cherry berry fruit, and heavy aromas are things like oak, you know, that stay in the glass, and quite often you'll drink a wine that you think is very sort of fruit forward and bright and friendly, but if you leave it half an hour, you'll find that it's a lot deeper, denser than it was before.
I absolutely agree with that, because in blind tasting and judging wine, 20 minutes will tell me everything. And it's usually the nose that is 90% of what I need to know, and tasting will sort of confuse the issue, but I agree with you. It all changes in that time frame.
And of course, understanding that and understanding your own tastes is really important, what a wine tastes like, because sometimes you pop a wine and you drink it, and you say, oh, you know, we should really get through this bottle quite quickly, because, you know, especially with the older wines, like older Pinot Noirs, you know, you open it and they can just be wonderful for maybe 10 minutes, and then they're dead. And so sometimes sometimes they're right. We need to get this down our necks. Enjoy it now. Well, it's still good, because, you know, the older the wine, the quicker that. There's already been, you know, if you take a 25-year Pinot Noir that you might drink from Burgundy, it's already had a micro-oxygen exchange with the cork. So through a cork, through a small aperture for 25 years. And then you put it in a glass and it gets oxygenation over minutes or hours in a bigger opening aperture. And therefore, you know, it falls very quickly. So it's really just very much a function of how oxygen breaks down wine. And, you know, we'd like to, as a rule of thumb in Burgundy, say, well, if it's been open an hour, that'll tell you pretty much what it'll taste like in a year.
Interesting.
I mean, that's kind of like a thing people say, but, you know, it's more of a metaphor. It's not scientific. It's not scientifically proven, but it's kind of a sort of metaphor that, you know, if you leave something open for an hour, it'll give you some idea of what this Pinot Noir will be like in a year in a cellar with that oxygenating process.
You mean not drink it for an hour?
Yeah. Yeah. You need 2 glasses for this experiment.
2 glasses. There you go. There you go. What to drink while you're waiting to drink the other thing you're going to drink.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But of course, you know and that's exactly why we decant wine or carafe wine, because there's a difference between decanting and carafing, right? Decanting is over a candle to get all the schmuck out of it. Carafing is, you know, when we carafe a young wine, we get a big decanter. You take the bottom, you glug it in. You're not like this. You're like because you're overtly trying to oxygenate the wine. You want this thing to be older than it is. So quite often, you know, I'll open a bottle of wine that, you know, if we're having for a special occasion of what it is, and then you know, I'll decide, oh, I need to decant this because, you know, this is just too tight, and then we'll stick it. Wine taste. That's what wine waiters do. You've heard of double decanting, right? So that's what they do. They'll take the wine, they'll taste it. They go, yeah, it's not showing great. They stick it in the decanter, throw it around, put it in the funnel, put it back in the bottle, and then when they serve it, it's great.
Yeah.
That's the whole concept of double decanting in a restaurant, to make the wine taste better when you serve.
Who needs a winemaker?
You're in the restaurant business, you know all about that, Terry.
I do. And there was only one restaurant ever who really did that, understanding what the wine was, and that was Esca in New York. I was so surprised that they knew their wine so well that they said, this is what we're going to do. They told you what they were going to do. And so you have the option to say no. But my curiosity is, so, okay, what restaurant were your parents in?
My parents?
Yes, you said they were restaurateurs, no?
They're restaurateurs, but I mean, that's being awfully kind. They're in the Irish pub business.
Oh,
Yeah.
the bomb.
Yeah.
They make a mean fish and chips.
Oh, mean fish and chip.
I bet.
The shepherd's pie is about as good as it gets.
Oh,
All right.
Yeah. We've been there for 40 years.
Okay, so what's it called?
It's called the Riverdale Steakhouse. It's in the Bronx.
Okay.
Our cousins
yeah.
live up that way, and our grandmother's name was Molly O'Malley. She's
Molly O'Malley.
Oh,
yeah,
Japanese?
straight from Ireland.
The northern part of Italy.
What? Yeah,
The northern part
exactly.
of Italy.
Yeah, that's who I'm named after. But yeah, our family's has a lot of Irish Catholic in it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, do you get up that way at all?
we do.
Yeah,
we
we haven't recently, but
We were up there in February, right, or January, right before
Yeah.
everything happened.
Yeah.
But we have cousins that live in Brooklyn and the
Queens,
Bronx
yeah.
and Queens, and then
Oh, really?
our aunt and uncle live in Brooklyn, and a lot of friends that live up in New York too.
Yeah,
Great.
some really good food is up there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah.
It's the mecca for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
how is your parents' pub doing during
It's been brutal.
crazy year? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's still, they just got the green light to have 25% occupancy
Oh, no.
3 weeks ago. So it's all street business, but luckily enough, we have a landlord that's been really good to us.
Good.
He's remembered that we showed up with the envelope every month, the first Monday every month, to pay him what we owe him. And so
Yeah.
he didn't forget that. He's been very good to us, but he's in the minority. A lot of them, a lot of them are going to go out of business. I mean, I think it's going to be 50% of them. New York City's decimated.
I know.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
so many friends that live in New York that have left
Yeah.
over the past 6 months. And I don't think they'll go back.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got 1 minute.
Well,
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. It was so nice to meet you all.
well, Jenna, I think before we go, it has to be a one-word answer. Everyone has to say which was their favorite
Yes.
wine.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
All right, we'll start with you. What's your favorite?
Me? Oh, well,
No, we'll start with the girls. We'll start with Molly and Helen.
All right, you
I
go
think
first.
the first one was mine.
Okay.
Okay, I think so. At first, that was my favorite, also the first. But then when I tasted it a second time, I actually think that I liked the Raymond a little bit more.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
The Raymond was my favorite, believe it or not.
Okay, Beth? Beth?
I liked the Raymond first, but I must admit that after it was open for an hour, that Bourgogne, the first one, really opened up and was really nice.
Okay, what about Doug?
Doug's off. His daughter called with a minor emergency. So
Okay, what about Dana?
Okay.
Dana, so they left too. Sorry, they had to go. Dana's favorite was the Raymond, definitely.
What
But
about Nate?
How many people are in this place?
very tricky, and I'm not sure he got to one. He didn't settle on anything before he left. So
Okay,
Yeah.
Bruce?
Oh, I think the first one was lovely, but they were all fantastic wines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
If you,
Okay,
if
and
you,
then Neil and Terry.
Bruce, if you sit on the fence, you get splinters.
Sure.
You have to give us an answer, my friend.
The
He's a
first one I
lawyer.
think was my favorite of the three.
For the Bouchard? Okay, very good.
They were all so different, though.
Yeah.
It kind of is hard to pick.
It was a great assortment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Terry?
so can you
I'm a
pick
fan
from
of
your
the
children? Terry?
I'm in on the Chablis, Neil.
You're the Chablis?
There we go.
Janet?
You know what was really impressive to me was the first one, the Bourgogne Blanc.
Cool.
I was so surprised by that, and it's held well. All of them are very, very good and great value for money. But that, I guess because I'm shocked.
Kathy?
So I have the same impression than Janet. I was very impressed by the first one, but my favorite is the Chablis. So
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I
And
have a
you
friend
know what
who-
my answer is, Janet. I'm just a Chablis, you know, choose my words carefully, but I am. So, yeah.
But the first
Chablis
one was
addict?
very
Addict?
impressive.
Dramatic.
Well, people in my circles called it an acid head.
You move in strange circles, Beth.
That's good. I'm going to steal that.
Well, this
All
is
right.
the first time we've gone overtime and it's still holding. So, you know, be free to go on until they shut us down, I guess. I have no idea.
Well,
I
thank you.
have to
guys
go.
so much for letting us in.
Minor emergency needs me. So.
All right, thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Too late, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Well done.
Merci mille fois.
Thanks, Bruce. Good to see you again, my friend. Take care. Be well.
We need to plan.
Thanks,
Kathy, we
Jen.
need
Yeah,
to
we do.
plan.
Yeah, we need to get you a date to come. Definitely.
And Bouchard as well.
November. We'll fix a mid-November date. What?
And you know what? We have a place where you can do it. We'll find it, okay?
Okay. Well.
So that'll be safe.
Okay.
Yeah.